some people out there. We are talking about Cantion's essay on economic theory today. This is probably the most important chapter in economic history. If you have never read anything on economics, going through the Canton essay, especially the chapters 6, 7, and 8 in part 2 of that essay, is probably the most telling of all the economic theories that I have ever read about what it is that is currently taking place within our economy. Now, further reflections on the increase and decrease of money to the state is incredibly telling. Now, when we read the abstract, it is very, very accurate to what it is that is now taking place within the economy as far as the idea of what it is that has happened to our manufacturing state, how it is that the separation between the rich and the poor are taking place. When you go and read through this essay, you are going to find the answers to a lot of these questions. Now, I'm going to break this down for you guys, not only here on YouTube, but on Twitter or X. X is, on X as well. So I'll be looking at both cameras. Doing this on my tablet for the first time. I have never really used this particular device to do a live stream, so I'm not sure how well it's going to be coming through. If it's not very good on YouTube, try over on X. I'm also over there live streaming as well. So it goes like this. Increases in the supply of money from a balance of trade eventually causes prices to rise. This in turn puts pressure on domestic producers and increases imports. The result is that a balance of trade is reduced and eventually is negative. This is Cantion's price specie flow mechanism, which demonstrates the reason for a tendency for equilibrium in international monetary flows. The balance of trade can result in economic power, but this also causes the economy to lapse into luxury and decline. And I think that's probably the most important part to understand, is that if you increase the money supply, you are definitely going to increase the amount of people out there who are spending that money. And if you are spending that money, you are going to cause a supply-demand imbalance that will eventually force the prices up and create the inequality that we now experience. And it's easy to blame politicians or banking systems or whatever out there, but when you recognize it from the underlying force, it really starts to make a lot more sense, especially like trying to figure out what it is that we need to do here for ourselves. Is there any way, hold on, why do I not see any of the messages here? No. All right, well, anyway, let's get into it. We have seen that the quantity of money circulating in a state may be increased by working its mines, by subsidies from foreign powers, by the immigration of foreign families, by the residence of ambassadors and travelers, but above all, by the regular and annual balance of trade. And I think that's the most important part right there, is because when we understand ourselves here in the United States, when we had a high standard of living, it was the manufacturing powerhouse distributing the greatest stuff in the world out there to the world, and the world was sending us their money, and this created an abundance here in the United States unlike anything that we or anybody else had ever experienced. But it's still the underlying economic forces that were playing out, and Canton describes that, right? The regular and annual balance of trade, from supplying goods to foreigners and by receiving from them at least part of the price in gold and silver. So again, here in the United States, we were producing the world's greatest stuff, sending that stuff out there to the world, and the world was sending us their money, which was gold. Right? It is by this last means that a state grows most substantially, especially when its trade is accompanied and supported by ample shipping and by a significant output of raw materials necessary for the production of the exported manufactured goods. So if you can manufacture and you can distribute cheaper and better than anybody else, you are going to be like top dog, right? I mean, that makes sense, right? You can produce and sell and distribute cheaper than anybody else can. You're going to hold the power. All right. However, the continuation of this commerce gradually introduces a great abundance of money and little by little increases consumption. So right there, right? The abundance of money and little by little increases consumption. And this is the most important part to understand. It's the new money coming in that increases the consumption. That's what's really taking place. And so when you think about the increase of money and you think about the increase of consumption, that being the real problem, where is it that the new money comes in? It comes in at the top. Right? The people at the end of the line, they suffer the most because they don't get access to the new money until it's already trickled through the system, causing the consumption and the prices to move up. They're at the end of the line. All right. Okay, consumption for foreign products must be imported to meet this demand and must be paid for by the reduction in the annual balance of trade. And now this is where it becomes the part where most people end up blaming politicians, corporations, banking systems, whatever, but it's really an underlying economic force that is playing out, right? I mean, he says it right here. Foreign products must be imported to meet this demand. As you raised your standard of living and you enjoyed buying new TVs, the foreign production started to come in. And this isn't something that's new. This is old. I mean, Canton wrote this essay hundreds of years ago. On the other hand, increased expenditures increase the cost of labor and the prices of manufactured goods. It often happens that some foreign countries try to set up the same kind of factories for themselves, in which case they stop buying those of the state in question. And now this is really where the problem starts to come in, right? Here you were producing the world's greatest stuff, sending that stuff out there to the world was sending you their money, and then they looked over and said, you know what? I think I can make that same thing for myself. And it wasn't as good, right? But when they started making it for themselves, they stopped buying it from you. And that's the point, right? Now, it often happens that some foreign countries try to set up the same kind of factories for themselves, in which case they stop buying those of the state in question. Although these newly established factories and manufacturers are not perfect at first, they reduce and even prevent the exporting of those goods from neighboring states into their own country, where they can be acquired at a cheaper price. So again, as they start to produce it and you're producing it and you have an elevated standard of living with high cost manufacturing, and they're producing a cheaper product, even though it's not as good at first, but they are making something that they are no longer going to buy from you. And in fact, the other people who were your customers are going to start buying from them as well. Right? Because they have the cheaper product. Okay. In this manner, the state begins to lose some branches of its profitable trade, and many of its workmen and artisans who lose their jobs will leave the state to find employment in new factories. In spite of this diminution in the balance of trade, the custom of importing various products will continue. And now I love that part about it, right? So here it is. People are always complaining about how it is that our domestic manufacturers are being pushed out, but yet the people continue to buy the foreign production. Right? In spite of this diminution in the balance of trade, the custom of importing various products will continue. This is the way that people behave. If the manufactured products of a state have great reputation and can be shipped to distant countries at a low cost, the state will maintain its advantage of the new foreign manufacturers for many years and will maintain a small balance of trade. So this is the important part to understand about the distribution network, right? Because if you are a manufacturer that's more expensive than anybody else, so long as you can distribute that stuff cheaper than anybody else, you're going to hold an advantage. Right? Even if your manufacturing costs are higher, your distribution costs are cheaper. And if your distribution networks are superior to anybody else, it doesn't really matter how much yours costs if you can get your product to the customer and they can't. Okay? And that's important to understand, because eventually you lose your distribution network as well. Right? Even though you might be an expensive manufacturer, still being somewhat competitive, eventually that will be lost as well. All right. For many years in small quantity. Okay. If, however, some of the maritime state tries to perfect the same articles and its navigation at the same time, It will, because of the cheapness of manufacturing, take away several branches of trade from the state in question. So, right? So here it is. You can't compete anymore. You could compete when you had the distribution network, even though you're a more expensive manufacturing. But as they figured out their distribution networks, they figured out the navigation on how to get those products out of their country and into other countries quickly and efficiently. You lose it. You lose your economy to that. Yeah. Consequently, the state will begin to lose its balance of trade and will be forced to send part of its money abroad every year in order to pay for its imports. And this is an unfortunate consequence of having a higher standard of living. I mean, if you want that foreign production, what are you going to do? You're going to have to export money in order to get it. And if you don't import that foreign production, you're going to lower your standard of living. And that's quite an unfortunate circumstance for a lot of people out there. Oh, here we go. All right, there's all the hi, uneducated, no messages yet. Video looks good, awesome. Audio's coming in and all that. Who is buying all these new TVs going? Wait, oh, there it is. Going on to going on 9 years or year 9 on mine. It's slow as though. Man, it's cold out here. Can you see my breath? It's warming up a little bit, but man. Okay. Who's buying all those TVs? That's an interesting question, but when you think about it, like when you go down to the store, watch how many people are actually buying TVs. It's quite a few. It's surprisingly on who it is that's getting, and even though they really don't need a TV. Like I've had the same TV for 4 years. I can't imagine like what it would be like to get a new TV. Like why would I want one? This one's working great. Now I did buy a cheap TV for my bedroom, so like I can watch movies back there or something. But other than that, like I mean, TVs are. Well, I guess Mac has one now too. So yeah, there's a lot of TVs get purchased. I didn't even think about it. All right. In this manner, the state he got one for his birthday a while back. All right. Grandpa gave it to him. All right. In this manner, the state begins to lose some branches of its profitable trade, and many of its workmen and artisan will. Wait a minute. Did I already read that? Oh, I did. I'm sorry. I'm on the wrong page here. Hold on here. Okay, consequently, there we begin. Okay, wrong paragraph here. Moreover, even when the state in question balance of trade, okay, here we go. Even if the state in question could keep a balance of trade and its greater abundance of money, it is reasonable to suppose that this abundance will plunge many wealthy individuals into luxury. Here we go. These are the people who are buying the TVs, right? It will still plunge many wealthy individuals into luxury. They will buy paintings, precious stones from abroad, and will want silks and rare objects. And they will set such an example of luxury in the state that in spite of the advantages or as in spite of the advantage of its ordinary trade, its money will flow abroad annually to pay for this luxury. This will gradually impoverish the state and cause it to pass from great power to great weakness. Now, that's the important sentence, or two sentences right there. What happened? Right? All this abundance of money that people got, like people think, oh man, all this money that flows around all over the place and we have this high standard of living and this is really awesome. No, it's really not. I mean, it is for the individual who gets to enjoy it during the time that it's happening, but for the most part, people are not going to enjoy this experience because of what happens. Right? The results of it are very devastating in a sense. We're going to find out here as we read the chapter, but it goes down like that, right? The money, for example, the luxury in the state that in spite of the advantage of its ordinary trade, its money will flow abroad annually to pay for this luxury. This is the unfortunate circumstances we sit in today. Buying this foreign production and exporting that money out there to the world. This will gradually impoverish the state and cause it to pass from great power to great weakness. We're in that passing moment now. We're going from the great power to eventual great weakness. And how does that great weakness become? How does it manifest into the economy? It happens when you turn off the new money. So long as the new money pours in, it's going to appear to be great power, but it will pass to great weakness when this turns off. Goes on to say this: when a state has arrived at its highest point of wealth, and I always assume that the competitive wealth of a state consists mainly in their respective quantities of money, it will inevitably fall back into poverty. Dang. Inevitably. It's a guarantee. It's going to happen at some point. There's very little doubt. And this is unfortunate. Here, let me move this right there so I can kind of look at you guys at the same time. I'll stay there. All right. Okay. And let me read that one more time just so it's clear. When a state has arrived at its highest point of wealth, and I always assume that a comparative wealth of a state consists mainly in their respective quantities of money. Who has the most money? Right? It will inevitably fall back into poverty by the ordinary course of things. This is guaranteed to happen at some point. Very little doubt. The too great of abundance of money, which gives power to the state so long as it lasts, throws them back imperceptibly but naturally into poverty. This is naturally occurring thing that's going to happen. People want to blame politicians, bankers, all these. This is naturally occurring. You will fall back into poverty. When the new money turns off, it's over. Thus, it would seem that when a state expands by trade and the abundance of money raises the prices of land and labor, the prince or legislator ought to withdraw money from circulation, keep it for emergencies, and try to slow down its circulation by every means. Accept compulsion in bad faith to prevent its goods from becoming too expensive and avoid the drawbacks of luxury. This is what they ought to do. How many times have you ever heard a politician say that to you? How many people are going to vote for a politician who says that to you? None. Nobody. Absolutely nobody. Again, what does it say? The prince or the legend, like we don't have, well, I mean, I guess we might have princes now, but we don't like have a prince, right? But we do have legislators. Right? And the legislators ought to withdraw the money from circulation, not try to stimulate, not try to push money out there, but to actually withdraw that money while we were a manufacturing powerhouse. That's what they ought to do. That's what Canton said. Keep that for emergencies and try to slow down its circulation by every means. Did they try to slow it down? No, man. We had the highest standard of living. Go out there and buy a house and a car and have the kids and all that and just spend. Spend money like crazy. Accept compulsion in bad faith, right? How many times do we actually like bail out the corporations and stuff like that? How many times have you actually watched the failure occur within the higher elites to prevent its goods from becoming too expensive, right? And avoid the drawbacks of luxury. See, it's a luxurious experience it's doing. People want to enjoy their life, so they go out and make a bunch of money, and then they spend that money. And it increases the standard of living. And then the standard of living gets very expensive because it's a luxurious experience. And then people wonder what the hell happened. Well, it's the drawbacks of luxuries. That's the unfortunate consequence of all this. However, it is not easy to perceive the opportune time for this or to know when money has become more abundant than it ought to be for the good and the preservation of the advantage of the state. Therefore, princes and heads of republics do not concern themselves much with this sort of knowledge and strive only to make use of the abundance while their state revenues, and strive and do not concern themselves with this sort of knowledge and strive only to make use of the abundance of their state revenues to extend their powers and to insult other countries on the most frivolous pretext. How normal is that? Like, that's typical, right? This is how they usually go down, is they really do not understand what it is that's happening out there, because if they were explaining it to you, you'd probably not even vote for them. You'd be like, no, I'm going to vote for this other person over there who's promised me all this stuff, right? Because if they came to you and says, hey, it's the drawbacks of luxuries and we really have to create a situation in which you're going to work harder for less. And we're going to save that money and we're going to hold it for emergency purposes and we're going to accept compulsion in bad faith and we're going to let this stuff start to collapse all around you in a way that then has the standard of living very affordable. But nobody's going to enjoy it because it's not luxurious. And we love luxuries, right? We love the luxurious experience. All right. Let me read that again. The princes and heads of republics do not concern themselves much with this sort of knowledge and strive only to make use of the abundance of their state revenues to extend their powers and to insult other countries on the most frivolous pretext. All things considered, working to perpetuate their glory of their reigns and administrations, leaving monuments of their power and wealth is perhaps the best that they can do, because according to the natural course of humanity, the state must collapse on its own. They only accelerate its fall a little. Nevertheless, it seems that they should try to make their power last during their time of their own administration. You see the problem that we now face? It's the ordinary course of things. And it's unfortunate, but the state must collapse on its own. And when it does, it's going to be poverty stricken for everybody. Few years are needed to raise the abundance to the highest point in the state. However, still fewer are needed to bring it to poverty for lack of commerce and manufacturing. Without speaking of the rise and fall of the Venice Republic and Hellenic cities, Flanders and Brabant, and the Dutch Republic, who have succeeded each other for profitable branches of trade, one may say that France's power has only been on the rise from 1646, when factories were established to produce clothing which had previously been imported, to 1684, when a number of Protestant entrepreneurs and artisans were driven out of France. The kingdom has done nothing but recede since that last date. And this is how you see it. This is the understanding of economic forces that are playing out that then give you a better understanding of what it is that's actually happening within our economy. Many people are going to look at this and think, man, that's old school, outdated, not even relevant to what it is that we are experiencing today, and not recognizing or realizing the underlying economic forces that are playing out are so telling of what it is we can face into the future. What we're going to face. There's very little doubt. At some point, this will happen. The new money will turn off and everybody falls into poverty. It's the ordinary, natural course of things. I know no better measure than the leases and rents of property owners to judge the abundance and scarcity of money in circulation. When land is leased at high rates, it's a sign that there is plenty of money in the state. But when land has to be leased at much lower rates, it shows, other things being equal, that money is scarce. Now, think about what it is that Donald Trump has recently said about housing. He doesn't want that to come down, right? He wants that money to stay in the real estate. He wants to see house prices stay elevated. He straight up said it. He doesn't want all those people who bought expensive houses to lose the value. He doesn't want to lose the wealth effect that comes from people who have seen hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of value or equity come to their home. He doesn't want to see any of that go, because it would be a sign that there is a lack of money in the state. Let's read the sentence one more time. I know no better measure than the leases and rents of property owners to judge the abundance and scarcity of money in circulation. When land is leased at high rates, it's a sign that there is plenty of money in the state. But when land has to be leased at much lower rates, it shows, other things being equal, that money is scarce. I have read in the state of France that acres of vineyard near Mantes, not far from the French capital, which leased for 100 livres. I have got this stuff so, like, I cannot pronounce words sometimes, right? Oh, good Lord. Tournos, God, I can't say it. All right. A full weight in 1660, only leased for 100 of the lighter money in the 1700s. However, the silver brought from the West Indies in the interval should naturally have raised the prices of land in Europe. The author of the State of France attributes this fall in rent to defective consumption. This is important to think about right here, right? This is interesting right here. In fact, it seems that he observed a reduction in wine consumption. However, I think he was mistaken the effect for the cause. The cause was great rarity of money in France. And the effect of this was the natural decrease in the consumption. See, people would have consumed just as much wine if they could have, right? Like, I think about how much beer I would have drank as much beer as I possibly could have, but there was a lack of money in my life that deprived me from being able to consume the beer. And that's what it is. It's the lack of money. The consumption would have been there. There was plenty of wine to drink, but there was no money to buy it. And that's what he saw falling, right? Was the lack of money to buy into that consumption. The consumption would have been there. In this essay, I have always suggested that, on the contrary, that the abundance of money naturally increases consumption. Boom, if you got more money, you're going to drink more wine. Right? And contributes above everything else to higher valuation of the land. When abundant money raises products to honest prices, the inhabitants eagerly work to acquire them. Although they do not show the same eagerness to acquire food and merchandise beyond what is needed for their maintenance. See, now this is the major problem that we now face with most people out there, is that they will work very hard to pay the rent, to pay the insurance, to get pay the light bill, right? To maybe buy a little bit of food, but then they will not work any more than that. They will only do enough to maintain themselves. And very rarely will they put any more effort into it. And this was recognized hundreds of years ago, right? This isn't new. This isn't like something that just all of a sudden came up because we got this generation of lazy people. That's not the case at all, right? I mean, that might be the case for some people, and it's probably recognizable in a lot of ways, but this is recognized again hundreds of years ago. So we can read the sentence one more time and give it a little bit different meaning now. When the abundance of money raises products to honest prices, the inhabitants eagerly work to acquire them, although they do not show the same eagerness to acquire food and merchandise beyond what is needed for their maintenance. Right? That's the way the majority of the people operate. Just like that. It is clear that a state with more money in circulation than its neighbors has an advantage over them, so long as it maintains this abundance of money. In the first place, given that the price of land and labor are circulated in terms of money, the state where money is most abundant will give up less land and labor than it receives in all areas of trade. Thus, the state in question sometimes receives products of 2 acres of land in exchange of that of only 1 acre, and the work of 2 men for that of only 1. It is because of this abundance of money in circulation in London that the work of 1 English embroiderer costs more than that of 10 Chinese embroiderers, though the Chinese embroiderer much better and churn out much more work in a day. In Europe, people are amazed that these people can live by working so cheaply, and that their wonderful fabrics that they send us cost so little. Think about this, right? This is so good. This is so good because people want to blame like all the stuff out there, but yet here it is. He was recognizing back in the day how the Chinese workers were much more productive and cheaper than the English ones were. This is hundreds of years old that he recognized this, and that you're going to be able to get a hell of a lot more products out of China for the same price than you would be getting out of the English, out of London, right? Out of England. So it's pretty easy to recognize what it is that's really happening there when you have a manufacturer who is going to be able to produce so much cheaper. There's no way you can compete against that. Secondly, tax revenues are more easily raised in a state where money is plentiful. See, this is where a lot of people kind of look at, like, the money printer going off, is that they're easily able to raise tax revenues when you have a lot of money in circulation, or they're putting out a lot of money. And this is something that I think, a lot of people are looking at as the excuse for the money printer, right? They'll kind of look at this kind of idea, that tax revenues are more easily raised in states where money is plentiful and in relatively large amounts. This gives the state, in the case of war or dispute, the means to gain all sorts of advantages over its adversaries with whom money is scarce. If there are 2 princes at war over sovereignty or conquest of a state where one has much money and the other has little money, but many estates where twice the money of his enemy, worth twice the money of his enemy, the first will be better able to attract generals and officers with gifts of money than the second will be by giving twice the value in land and estates. You see how much more valuable money is than land? See, here in this case, like you can go and hire all the, like, hire a militia, hire mercenaries or whatever, and they will accept the money at a cheaper rate than if you had given them land. Like, you say, hey man, I'll give you $1 million worth of land or $500,000 worth of gold, and they'll be like, I'll take the $500,000 in gold, thank you, right? Because they don't want double the land; it's not worth as much to them. And the reason, right? Grants of land are subject to challenge and revocation, right? You got to trust the property rights. So you got to trust government. You don't have to trust anybody when you have gold. And cannot be relied upon like money. You see? And again, Canton talked about that. Like, is land great? Absolutely it is. Land is definitely a good one, but it's not like gold. Not even the same thing. Right? Grants of land are subject to challenge and revocation and cannot be relied upon like money. With money, munitions of war and food can be bought, even from the enemies of the state. Money can be given for secret services without witness, but land, produce, and goods would not serve for this purpose, not even jewelry or diamonds, because they are easily recognized. After all, it seems to me that the comparative power of wealth of a state other things being equal, in greater or less abundance of money in circulation in them. Right? This is why it's important for everybody to be in gold and silver individually. Right? We can't rely on the government to hold out gold and silver. We have to do it individually. As long as we have it in this country, we'll make it through it. But the less we have, the more punishing it will be. I still have to mention two other methods of increasing the amount of money in circulating in the state. The first is when entrepreneurs and private individuals borrow money from foreign correspondents at interest. Borrowing money from the foreigners. Isn't it cool that Canton addressed this stuff? Like, people ask all the time, man, what does it mean when here it is, Canton addressed this very situation. When you start borrowing a lot of money from the foreigners. Man. The first is when the entrepreneurs and private individuals borrow money from the foreign correspondents at interest, or when foreigners send their money into the state to buy shares of government stock. All right? Think about the U.S. treasuries in the hands of foreign holders, foreign investors. People say that's not happening. Go and look at a chart right now. There is more foreign holding of U.S. government debt now than just about any time in history. Of course, there's so much to hold, so I mean, it makes sense that there would be more holding of it, but it doesn't change the fact that they are holding this debt. Right? That's money coming into the country. This often amounts to a very considerable sum on which the state must annually pay interest to these foreigners. These methods for increasing the money in the state do make it more abundant and diminish the rate of interest. Low interest rate environment. Think about that. How many times have you heard people say that interest rates need to be much higher than they are today? And it was like, well, when you have an abundance of money that's coming into the state, this is what ends up occurring from it, is a low interest rate environment. With this money, the entrepreneurs in the state find it possible to borrow more cheaply, to provide work, and to establish factories with the anticipation of profit. So here they get all this money, and it shows a bunch of economic activity. People get very excited about it. They're like, yeah, bring it on in. Look at all this stuff that happens. We get to borrow cheaply, provide work, establish factories, anticipate profit. Woohoo! The artisans and all those whose hands this money passes through consume more than they would have done if they had not been employed by the means of this money. So now all this new money comes in, and everybody is singing, like, McDonald's makes a lot of money. Like, you can go and get a job at McDonald's and make more money than a teacher assistant over at the grade school. Right? And this is what ends up happening is that the money starts flowing through. All the artisans and all those whose hands money passes through consume more than they would done if they had not been employed by these means of this money. This consequently increases the prices just as if the money belonged to the state, and through the increased consumption or expenditures this causes. Think about that. As if that money belonged to them. This causes the prices to increase as if that money belonged to them. Like, holy crap. This consequently increases prices just as if the money belonged to the state, and through the increased consumption or expenditures this cause, public revenues derived from the taxes on consumption are increased. It's not even their money. They get to raise the taxes on stuff that wasn't even theirs. Money lent to the state in this manner brings many advantages with it, but in the end, it is always burdensome and harmful. Always. People say, what is it that the government's going to do about the debt? Well, nothing. They can't. Nothing. It's going to be a painful experience, and it's always burdensome and harmful. It's not a good thing. The state must pay interest to the foreigners. Excuse me. My hands are cold here. I can't even touch the pages. Okay. To the foreigners every year. And aside from this loss, the state is at the mercy of the foreigners, who can always cause trouble if they decide to withdraw their capital. And that's where a lot of concern comes in, that the de-dollarization, right? And here it is, Canton talks about it. It's not like it's not an impossibility. It's very much a real possibility. Okay? Surely they will want to withdraw their capital when the state needs it the most, as when preparing for war and defeat is feared. The interest paid to the foreigners is always much more considerable than the increase in public revenue caused by this money. One can observe these loans passing from one country to another according to investors' confidence in the state to which they are sent. But in reality, states that have paid heavy interest on these loans for many years will often find themselves bankrupt and unable to repay the capital. Okay? It's a matter of time. They're still doing it. Hey, everything's cool so long as it's going. But then one day it won't be. When the trust is shaken, shares of public stock fall. Foreign shareholders do not like to sustain losses, preferring to content themselves with collecting interest while waiting for confidence to return. But sometimes it does not return. In declining states, the principal objective of public administrators usually is to restore confidence in order to attract foreign loans. If the ministry does not act in bad faith and keep its obligations, the money of the subjects will circulate without interruption. In this case, money from abroad has the power of increasing the quantity of money in the state. And this is the unfortunate situation we now face, right? See, we used to be a manufacturing powerhouse that produced stuff, sent that stuff out there to the world, and the world sent us their new money, yeah, or sent us money that was our new money. And that was a good position to be in. Manufacturing powerhouse, saving, having that good standard of living. But when you go down the borrowing road, it gives you a appearance that everything seems to be awesome. But things are far from awesome, because that new money can instantly turn off. And when it does, we already know the natural course of things is to fall into poverty. All right. But the borrowing goes on. The borrowing road, which holds an advantage in the present, leads to a dead end and is but a flash in the pan. To restore a poor state with a shortage of money, a constant and real balance of trade is needed on an annual basis, as is the development through navigation of the articles and manufacturers produced cheaper and thereby suitable for exportation. Cheaper manufacturing, cheaper navigation, cheaper distribution networks. That's the only way to do it. How do you do that? You got to lower your standard of living to be competitive. Right? We can get real good at technology, be good at shipping, being good at communications, all that other stuff, but eventually they will get just as good at it. And then it'll be very difficult to compete. Merchants are the first to make their fortunes. Then the lawyers may get their part. Isn't that always the case? Hundreds of years ago, still the case, right? The prince and tax collectors get a share of the expense of all the others and distribute their graces as they please. When money becomes too plentiful in the state, luxury will follow and the state will fall into poverty. All right? How many times does he say it? Over and over again. Luxuries will follow and the state will fall into poverty. This is roughly the cycle that may be experienced by a large state which has both capital and industrious inhabitants. A talented public administrator is always able to begin the cycle over again. Not many years are needed to see it tried and succeed, at least in the beginning, which makes for the most interesting situation. The increased quantity of money in circulation will be brought about by several factors that my argument does not allow me to examine now. As for states without much capital and where capital can only be increased by accident or by particular circumstances of the times, it is difficult to find the means that would allow them to flourish by trade. If they don't have the industrious capabilities of it, it's going to be hard for them to flourish. They can do it by accident or particular circumstances that gave them the ability at that moment. But if they aren't industrious enough to maintain that, then they're not going to flourish. No administrator can restore the republics of Venice and Holland to the brilliant situations from which they have fallen. But Italy, Spain, France, and England, however poor they may be, are still capable of attaining a high degree of power by trade alone if they led by a good administration and if they operate separately. If all these states were equally well administered, they would be great only in proportion to respective capital and to the greater or less industriousness of their people. Okay? Because it always comes down to the industriousness of the people. I don't know how many people want to recognize that, but that's always the case. Right? And that, the idea that you can force people to be industrious, I find that very illogical. Like, if the people are industrious, then you can have a group of people come in and say, hey, man, we need to govern you and take a little bit from you and spread this all around. But until you are industrious, they can't do that. The last method I can think of to increase the quantity of money actually circulating in the state is by violence and arms. And this method is often blended with others, since in all peace treaties, one will try to maintain trading rights over the other and other privileges one could obtain. When a state mandates contributions or makes several other states tributary to it, this is a very sure method of obtaining their money. I will not examine the methods of putting this theory into practice, but I will say that all the nations who have flourished in this manner have not failed to decline. All of them. If you go and start taking from these other nations for your own use, you will eventually fall into decline. Right? Let me read it again. When a state mandates contributions or makes several other states tributary to it, this is a very sure method of obtaining their money. I will not examine the methods of putting this theory into practice, but I will say that all the nations who have flourished in this manner have not failed to decline, like states that have flourished through their commerce. Same like as if they had done it with their commerce. The ancient Romans were more powerful in this manner than all the peoples we know of. Nevertheless, these same Romans, before losing an inch of their land of their vast estates, fell into decadence through luxury and impoverished themselves by the reduction of money which circulated among them. It was this luxury that caused their empire to pass into the hands of the eastern nations of the Orient. It was their luxurious experience. They bought all those wonderful products of the Orient and they sent them their money, and then they impoverished themselves. Right? Let me read it again. Nevertheless, these same Romans, before losing an inch of their land, of their vast estates, fell into decadence through luxury and impoverished themselves by the reduction of money which circulated among them. It was this luxury that caused them caused their empire to pass into the hands of the eastern nations of the Orient. See how it works? You see this luxurious experience? This is what drives it. This is what drives the problems. Uh-oh. Back up here, guys. Oh, jeez. Oh, what's going on here? Hold on. Uh-oh. How did I do that? Man, I messed up the Twitter feed. How do I do that? All right, well, I'm going to set you guys up. Oh, wait a minute. Here we go. Where are we? Where are you? Oh, man, that's all messed up now. Okay, well, I'm going to set you guys, maybe, I don't know. Can I set you like that? No. All right, I don't know what happened there with the Twitter feed. We got 57 people still watching. I'm sorry that it went sideways. I'll try and figure that part out here in just a second. All right, let's finish this up and then I'll mess with that. All right, so long as Romans' luxury, which did not begin until after the defeat of Antiochus, king of Asia, around AUC 564, came from the product of the land and the labor of all the vast estates of their dominion. All right, so long as the Romans' luxury came from the production of the land and labor of all the vast estates of their dominion, the circulation of money only increased instead of decreasing. The public was in possession of all the gold and silver and the copper mines in the empire. They had the gold mines of Asia, Macedonia, and Aquileia. In the rich mines, both gold and silver of the Spain and other countries. They had several mints where gold, silver, and copper coins were struck. In Rome, the consumption of all the goods and merchandise drawn from their vast provinces did not diminish the circulation of money any more than the pictures, statues, and jewels themselves. Although the wealthy landlords spent excessive amounts for their feast and paid 15,000 ounces of silver for a single fish, all that did not diminish the quantity of money circulating in Rome, given that the provinces made tributes regularly, not to mention that the money brought in by the lenders, by the governors, with their extortions. The amounts annually extracted from the mines increased the circulation in Rome during the Augustus' whole reign. However, luxuries was already on a very great scale, and there was much eagerness not only of the curiosities produced in the empire, but also for the jewels from India, pepper and spices, and all the rarities of Arabia. Silks, which were not made in the empire, began to be in demand there. Nevertheless, the money drawn from the mines still exceeded the sum sent out of the empire to buy all these things. So even though they were like, let me see if I can fix this. Even though they were like, just dumping money into this luxurious experience, because they had all these other nations, basically, that is not going to, oh, there's all that. How do I get that to work? Ah, well. All right. Sorry, guys, over there on X. You're just going to have to deal with it all sideways. All right. But ultimately, they had all this money coming in from all these other countries and basically making them pay Rome for, basically ruling them. And by doing that, even if they were buying the foreign production, it was still that money was coming back in great abundance. So it didn't diminish the amount of money that was circulating there. All right, luxuries was already on a very great, and eager this, okay, silks which were there. Nevertheless, the money drawn from these mines still exceeded the sum sent out of the empire to buy all these things. However, under Tiberius, money became scarce when that emperor collected 2.7 billion sesterces in his treasury. To restore an abundant circulation, he only needed to borrow 300 million on mortgages of his estate. After his death, Caligula spent all of Tiberius's treasure in less than 1 year, and it was then that the abundance of money in circulation was at its highest in Rome, and the wind of luxury kept on blowing. The historian Pliny estimated that in his time, the emperor exported at least 100 million sesterces annually. This was more than was drawn from the mines. Under Trajan, the land prices fell by one-third or more. According to the younger Pliny, and money continued to decrease until the time of Emperor Septimus Severus. Money was then so scarce in Rome that the emperor collected enormous quantities of wheat, being unable to collect enough money for his enterprise. Thus, Roman Empire declined through the loss of its money before losing any of its estates. Right? They lost its money first. They exported all its money before it started losing out on its estates. That is what luxury brought about, and what is always will bring about in similar circumstances. So, very important to understand these principles, understanding these economic forces that are playing out. When you have an abundance of money in the state, you are going to increase the consumption. There's very little doubt about it. That is the move into luxurious experiences that are eventually going to separate the rich from the poor. And then when the new money turns off and the consumption ends, everybody falls into poverty and misery. What stage of the game are we in here? All right? See, we had this rise of an industrious people, the industrious revolution, right? The industrial revolution brought in all kinds of new money. It raised our standard of living. We enjoyed it. We enjoyed it a lot. With a high standard of living, you could have a single income producing enough for the entire family. Wife, kids, retirement, college funds, all the stuff. That's because we were an industrious powerhouse producing the world's greatest stuff and sending that stuff out there to the world, and we got to enjoy that experience. Now, what ends up being a result from that? Competitive foreign production. Every time. This is Canton describing it. He knew it was going to take place, he recognized it's going to take place, and it's going to take place again at some point in the future. But when you recognize that you were a manufacturing powerhouse that was bringing in new money from that manufacturing that is now shifted, how is it shifted? Where does the new money come from? Debt issuance. Now, the debt issuance brings in money and makes it seem like things are very awesome. All this new money flows through, and artisans and workers and everybody gets to participate so long as the new money is flowing through. But we already know what has taken place, and that is the move into luxurious experiences with it, and it's separating the rich from the poor. When the new money turns off, what happens? Right? People start to suffer in pain and misery because of that. This is our unfortunate circumstances we now face. What is it you expect the government to do? If they do the right thing, everybody falls into poverty and misery. If they try to do the right thing for the people, we're going to have more inequality and separation between the rich and the poor. What is it that you expect them to do here? There's no good answer at this point. Everybody seems to think that they have this answer, but then they never go back and understand that these economic forces are playing out, forcing the situation we now face. And then people say, well, they could tax the rich, they could do all this other stuff. And I'm like, they kind of talk about that. Doesn't work. What happened is the same thing that's always going to happen. You made a bunch of money. We made a bunch of money, and we wanted to enjoy that new money. Enjoying the new money is the problem that we now face today. It was the added consumption, and with added consumption comes foreign production and separation. Thank you guys for hanging out over here. God, I wish I could figure that one out. You guys are so awesome to hang out here over on Twitter, or on X, but if I could figure this thing out, I would. But I can't even look. I can't even get it to, nothing happens, 44 more viewers. Look, I can see the viewers. I can see it all there. How come I cannot? What do I do? Do you want to end the stream? No, I don't want to end the stream, but I want it to be big again. Hide chat. No, I don't want to hide chat. I want to expand screen. How do I expand the screen? Oh, well. Hmm. Oh, well, guys. I can't figure it out, but that's what you see over on Twitter if you were to be there. Yeah. Oh, well, wait a minute. What is that looking at? That's looking. That's outside. Almost. Oh, well. You can look at the dice. You guys can look at the dice over there. I'm sorry. I don't know what to do. Let's read through some of these comments over here. All right. Pretty sure the past tipping point of possibly fair. In moderately high. What is this? It's moderately high. If it gets ridiculous in terms of food, it will definitely know. Boots on the ground. We're making it out in mud. All right, my life is amazing. Well, good, Kurt. The world reserve currency piece adds a wrinkle. I don't think it's accounted for. American Empire at the 250th year mark next year, we're cooked. Everything is awesome. Everything is cool when you're part of a team. Everything is awesome. What's up, Deplorable? American way of life will drastically hinge when the SHTF, yeah? But it's too late. Will I still have a mortgage? Depression, not recession, ongoing decline for how many years now? But see, this is really where I think Twitter has a better view of the dice. Yeah, it sure does. Here, I'll give you guys a shot of the dice there. But yeah, you can go over to Twitter and I don't know what's going on over there on that thing. All right. Rug pull will be decisive and well timed. They would never lose. Well, this is the thing. Like, I think, I mean, to ultimately, like, blue collar workers are already dead, are already like the dead man walking. And I mean, I don't like saying it because that's ultimately what like most of us are like, especially with like those who probably resonate with this channel a lot, are generally probably more in the blue collar line of work. You know, and to know that this hard work that we do to bring the infrastructure to the level that it is really no longer a benefit to us to provide. Like when if you're working linesman, if you're doing electrician work, if you're doing a plumber, if you're concrete worker, you're doing all this stuff, you're building that of what it is that we operate with every single day. And if it's not enough to sustain your way of life, then literally the work that is bringing the best of this society to us is no longer a benefit to the average person. Why would you even try to do it? Yeah. And this is the unfortunate consequences we now face, is that it would be much easier for an individual to show up every day if they actually think that they could buy a house at the end of the day. Right? But when you lose that ability to even think about buying a house, like it's not even a real possibility anymore, then why do you even try? What would be your striving? You would just be like, man, I'm just gonna end up just working my butt off and never really acquiring anything. The motivation ends up getting lost. But at least if you could dangle a carrot out there that says, yeah, you have a real possibility of acquiring this, then you show up every day to try and get it. It's not. I mean, that's pretty easy. Uh, let's see. Laugh out loud. It feel great during the rug pull if you're broke up. The psychology I find fascinating. They always crash the market with 401ks eating the losses. Cheeseburger. Why don't you try a decent comment here? All right. Office jobs are worse off than anyone. Yeah, I do office kind of work, but then I can also drive, I also drive forklift too. So it's like, I answer phones the majority of the time, but I do occasionally go out there and move material around with the forklift. God, use deployable brakes with. Huh. Okay. Let's cruise up here a little ways, see what's going on. Alright, lots with the rug pull. All these ones already read. I'm currently pursuing excellence by changing the rear brake pads on the rotors on my truck. There you go. I'm not a good mechanic. Wish me luck. Well, I mean, at least that's something that is like reasonable for somebody who's not even a mechanic, who can you watch a couple of videos or just read up on it, and it's pretty easy to change that around if you have some kind of idea of twisting a wrench. So, I mean, that's a good thing to be involved in, is to do your own work on your vehicles, especially when it comes to something like that. Thanks for the advice, but I already got the rotors off. I'm starting to clean the new rotors before putting on my hands. What does this say? Oops. Oh, there we go. Still good usually. Bust my knuckles. I swear. Alright. Easy peasy. And that's kind of funny how, a lot of times people will say something like, well, changing the brakes is really easy peasy. But if you've never done it before, then it seems very confusing. It's dangerous. You want the car to stop, and if you have no idea what you're doing, that could be very, overwhelming of an idea of changing the brakes out. Once you do it, you're like, oh, man, that wasn't nearly as hard as I thought it was. And so when you just like anything out there, especially when it comes to, studying economics or investing or something like that, it's kind of the same thing. If you have no idea what you're doing, and then you get very nervous and scared about it. And then the first few times you do it, then you're like, oh man, that was fun. That was enjoyable. I can't wait to do it again, because now you know how to do it and you're really excited about it. And, because you got this new understanding and knowledge of things. All right. I'm such a penny pincher. I had to replace the rotor because I was trying to make those pads last as long as possible. Sometimes it's not a good idea. Yeah, it's better to replace the pads than having to wear it all the way through and then replace the rotor as well. Test drive is the acid test in my experience. I'm going to see clamp the old brake pads in the piston right now. Sounds like other people do their own maintenance as well. All right. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for joining in on the Twitter, somewhere over there. Hey, guys. Hey, Twitter, what's up? I can't even find the screen. There it is. Hey. All right. Thank you for joining in on the Twitter. Hopefully next time I won't screw up the screen on that one. Hopefully everything came through on the tablet here. It's the first time I've done a live stream using my tablet. It looks like everything came through good. Everybody is talking, saying the sound was all right. I really appreciate everybody breaking down this essay with me. Canton's essay on economic theory, incredibly telling of how it is that the new money comes into the state and separates the rich from the poor. By breaking this essay down and then recognizing some of these forces that we are experiencing today gives you a much better understanding of how it is you're supposed to position yourself and deal with the retirement plan, the business plan, or whatever it is you got going on out there. This is the way we do it. And to me, this particular chapter is probably the most important one. It is very telling of the situation we face when moving into luxurious experiences. That is the problem. Right? It's the luxuries. If you are a production saving nation who keeps your expenses low and you continuously be productive and saving, there's no way that you can't have a strong economy. But the moment you move into luxurious experiences, then the whole thing starts to deteriorate, and that's the problem we now face. Thank you, All-Nighter, for all the hard work you do for the channel. I'll read a couple of more of these and then I'm going to call it quits. What's your thoughts on real estate market for 2026? Seems like prices are already high. The scariest part is using 2.5-ton jack stands. The real estate market, I don't know. We're going to have to figure out what it is that, the administration has planned, as far as the idea of trying to bring housing in, but then at the same time support the housing prices. Seems two different things that are happening there. So, as far as my belief of what's taken place and going into the future, real estate is by far the number one indicator of an abundance of money in the system. And if you think that the abundance of money is going to diminish, then you could probably anticipate that the house prices would come down and land prices would come down and stuff like that. But if you think quite the opposite and that the abundance of money is going to continue to pour in, at least for the most part, like there's going to be times in which that you have recessionary pressures or deflation, but for the most part you're probably going to find central bank intervention, government attempting to do something about it, and with that will be ever increasing amounts of new money, separation between the rich and the poor, and there's no better evidence of that than in property, right? The Fed lost control. I don't think so. I don't think so. Yeah. Do you think AI will cause lots of jobs losses in 2026 or after? I was laid off earlier this year. Well, yeah, probably, but that's almost anticipated. Like the jobs themselves don't really do anything for the economy anyway, not like they once did. Like, you have to think the Federal Reserve at one time would try to stimulate the economy by lowering interest rates. By lowering interest rates, you would get corporations to go out there and hire people. By hiring people, more people working and then spending into the economy, creating the consumption and supply demand imbalances, and essentially the economic the economic you know uh, environment that would be that of like an improvement, right? I don't know how to quite describe it, because when I say things like improvement, people think, oh, it's a better economy, but that's not really any better, right? Because it separates the rich from the poor even more, and things get worse, and the inequality gets worse, and so it's not an improvement in any way. It's just an understanding of how it's going down. So knowing that the people and their jobs don't really matter to the Federal Reserve anymore, not like they once did. And I know that's really heartbreaking for a lot of people to hear, but that's really the truth of the matter. See, like when you were going to work and then you went to go and become a consumer, you actually increased the consumption, and that was an economic event. Now you can go to work, have very low unemployment, like historically low unemployment, and all those people going to work and spending that money doesn't create an economic environment that the Federal Reserve would be looking for with all these people working. Like all these people working and spending money didn't do it. That's scary as hell for the Fed. It's like, man, now what do we do? All the blue collar, all the working class individuals out there who bust their ass every single day don't really contribute to the consumption in the economy like we need them to. The only people who are doing that is the top 20% of people, and mainly it's the top 10. Top 10% of household incomes do 50% of the consumption. Dang. Like, what is it the rest of the 90% of the people are doing? Barely anything. Like, 90% of the people get to share in the other 50%. And here it's even worse than that. Because if you think about it, if the top 10% of household incomes are doing 50% of the consumption, then you can probably assume that the next 10% of household incomes, meaning like the group between 10 and 20% of household incomes, are probably doing an additional 50% of the remaining consumption that is out there. I mean, that would be make sense, right? Top 10% do 50%. The top 20% or the next 10% do an additional 50% of the consumption, which means the top 20% of people are doing essentially 70% of the consumption. 80% of the people are not contributing. You could double your consumption, you still wouldn't be able to compete. That's the problem we now face. Is that you can increase your wages, like if they increased everybody's wages, we'd be making so much more money and we'd be able to contribute to the economy. No, you can't. There's not enough. Like you're not going to contribute enough consumption to compete against the top 20% of people who are consuming. It's not happening. It's not going to happen. Right? Like you increase your wages 5, 10, $15 an hour, it's not going to make a difference comparatively to the top 20% of people who are already doing 70% of the consumption. You might be able to shrink it a little bit, take it from 70% down to 60 if you're lucky. But that's it, and that's with massive amounts of effort trying to go into the working class individual. It's not going to work that way. You're not going to be able to work enough to get the money to consume that much. But they will force feed it into you with UBI payments. All right? And it's just like, here, we'll just force feed a consumer. You don't have to go work for it. Just here. Go spend it. And that's the unfortunate consequences of it, is that it doesn't matter if it was AI. This is the direction we're going. AI is just, part of it, is part of the symptoms, and it's probably going to expedite it a little bit faster. But it was on its way anyway. Like the whole idea of the working class individual being able to contribute to this economy in a very, meaningful way is not realistic anymore. Not in the way we do this. Hey, right on. I got a super chat. Well, we'll stick around for another second here. It looks like Twitter's about ready to die. My camera's fading out there. So if you're listening on Twitter, thank you so much for joining in on that. But we may end up losing connection on that here in just a few. It says, here is a band-aid for Triffin's Dilemma. Triffin's Dilemma? Okay. Triffin, right? Triffin's Dilemma, but very cool. Encourage the private market and the Fed to purchase foreign sovereign debt written in their local currencies. Man, so there's somebody who follows the channel right there. As somebody who's been paying attention to what it is that the Federal Reserve may need to do into the future in order to do liquidity injections, knowing that the United States is on an unsustainable debt path, meaning that if the Federal Reserve continues in operations of like things like quantitative easing, where they buy up the U.S. Treasury debts, put them on the balance sheet, they will send the United States into an unsustainable debt path where they will not be able to recover from. They are very well aware of it. They say now that the United States is not on an unsustainable debt, but they are on an unsustainable debt path, meaning if they continue to do this, it will eventually fail. Sorry, guys, over there on X. Appreciate you. The phone just died. I'm sorry. The idea that they are going to send the United States into this unsustainable debt path or situation needs to be addressed in the future with more money injection without that problem. And the only thing that I have found so far comes from a Ben Bernanke speech where he literally says the Federal Reserve already has the authority to buy the debt of a foreign nation, foreign sovereign debt. That is probably one of the scariest things that I have ever thought of as far as what it would be like to have the Federal Reserve taking foreign government debt, putting it on their balance sheet, and issuing out a liability. What would that liability be? Right now, it's Federal Reserve notes and dollars, right? Reserves on the banking system. If it was foreign government debt sitting on the Fed's balance sheet, the asset that they hold is a foreign nation's promise to pay. That's scary. That's scary as hell. All right? But it's very real possibility coming in the future. Thank you so much. Who was it that sent that? Crusader Sarah? Crusader Capitalist. I got it. Okay, it was split. I'm Crusader Capitalist. Man, I am a terrible reader. Thank you so much for the $5. Poor people harvest the food, keep it from the wealthy, and force them to leave. It won't happen, right? Won't happen. It's not scary. It is. I mean, you're right, it's not. It's actually somewhat entertaining for me because, I mean, I at least thought about what it would be like if that was to actually occur, but most people probably wouldn't have no clue about what it is that they need to do or would or could do in that sort of situation. I'm headed into an internet dead zone. I will try leaving the stream playing, but won't promise anything. Well, thank you all night for being here, man. I really appreciate you. We're going to end the stream here in just a few minutes anyway. So, rebellion is real. Rebellion is real, but you know what it's going to come from is civil disobedience. That's what it's going to come from, is people literally stepping up and saying, I'm not participating in this anymore like that. In fact, I'm going to start behaving and conducting myself in a way that literally makes the government irrelevant in my life. The idea of true anarchy, not the ones where you go and you blow things up and you fight and you do all that's rage and frustration and misunderstandings that are, coming out. When you think about what it is that you can do to literally eliminate government out of your life in ways that says, I'm just not involved. I'm just not going to do it in that way that says you have any control over me, and all those carrots that you dangle and stuff like that, you can keep them. Okay? And to literally feel that way. It's like I'm making plans without you. Right? All that Social Security that you want to hold over my head and, and try and, vote for me and do this or else you're going to lose all that. You know what? Have it. Right? Why don't you just keep it? And that way you don't get to hold it over my head. And people get very angry with that. And I'm thinking, no, you're angry because you made it important in your life. Now you got government controlling your outcome, controlling your experience. You ever thought about maybe trying to conduct yourself with that not being part of it? No. Now you're upset and scared, and you're really upset and scared when somebody like me says, you know what, just keep it. I don't even care. Right? You can, if you take that thing from me, yeah, I was expecting you anyway to take it. Those of us from Generation X and younger never really believed that we were going to get Social Security anyway. Right? Like, I don't know how many people actually believe that they were going to get it. The closer we get to it, I'm like, hey, that's kind of cool. I wonder if it's still going to be there. Literally, that's what I think. I wonder if it's going to be there or not. If it is, cool. If it isn't, didn't really expect it anyway. And if nobody else around me is getting it either, then we're all in the same boat together. Yay. Alright. Nah, I'm collecting my Social Security. You are, yeah. I mean, and I will too. I mean, I'll try and fill out the thing. Go ahead, send it, and we'll see if it happens. But, as somebody is going to hold it over my head saying, man, if you don't vote for me, you're going to lose it. And it'd be like, you know what, just keep that thing. Don't talk to me like that. Can't limit government when they have a monopoly on force and coercion and everything. You can be structured as a crime. And see, here again, living in the fear of government. That's what they do to you. And so you obey. Civil disobedience isn't like, you can learn your rights and say, no, man, I'm not talking to you. Right? The government says, where are you going? What are you doing? And you'll be like, I have a dream of collecting Social Security. Without society look like without Social Security, you wouldn't have one. Yeah, and what do you have right now but a society that is bent over the knee of government when it comes to their Social Security payments that are going to be like less beneficial going into the future, as the contributions that are being paid out will have less purchasing power because we don't produce the real goods and services here in the United States like we once did. And this isn't me saying it, that's Alan Greenspan saying it 20 plus years ago. I mean, he straight up said it, we can guarantee your payments, that's not the problem. You will get your money. But we don't produce the real goods and services here in the United States, so the idea that you're going to be able to use those benefits for anything is very unlikely. That's the problem we now face. You can have all the creative financing in the world, make the payments, like the Social Security payment is not the problem. It's the ability to have any kind of purchasing power because of it. That's the problem we face. People give up their rights for safety. I mean, just think about it. If you had considered never getting made plans outside of the Social Security payment, like literally it was just like, I have no other choice. I have to do this because I'm not getting a Social Security payment. And you conducted yourself that way. And then you got the Social Security payment too. Think about how awesome that is. But how many people just relied on the idea that they were going to get a Social Security payment and made no other accommodations in their life for their retirement or anything else that they had? They suffer the consequence of that. Maybe they should never have been promised that outcome. And then they would have done something about it. Are we done here, guys? 152 people watching, 77 likes, $5 in super chat. You guys are so awesome with supporting the Uneducated Economist. I really want to appreciate, had a recent tip sent to me on PayPal. Thank you very much for the individual who sent that. I really appreciate it, especially around the Christmas time. That was very nice of you. Very generous. how many more years do we have until fall into pour, like you were saying? What do you think that will look like? It's going to look horrible as hell, but the idea of it is very like difficult to try and put a timeline on, because ultimately, if you were to have asked me back in the great financial crisis, I would have said it would have already happened by now. So I had to really change the way that I was looking at and viewing how it was that they were handling the economy, and especially the currency situation, because it's when the new money turns off. So ultimately, it's when the debt issuance stops. When the U.S. Treasury can no longer sell their government bonds, right, the U.S. government bonds, out there to anybody, not the Fed, not the people, not the banking, not the insurance companies, not other foreign people. It's when that part turns off, and then that new money that comes in is no longer coming in. When that happens, everybody falls into pain and misery. But think about this. We have the possibilities of negative interest rates that could come from digital currencies. If you can pull cash out of the system and you're in stable coin situation in which that everything is in a digital currency form, right, digital token, now you can't pull your money out in cash. It's sitting in this digital token. Well, if it's sitting in this digital token, now you have the ability to force negative interest rates because you won't be able to pull it out in cash. And that's the difference inside of what it is that we can face going into the future as opposed to what we've had to deal with in the past. The negative interest rate environment wouldn't work unless you have a cashless society. The digital component is absolutely critical for that. And now, the idea of using negative interest rates to try and stimulate the economy doesn't really work at this time, but it can. And it could going into the future if we, think about it in the sense that if you have no cash and you are able to take interest rates far enough below the neutral interest rate, well, then you could very well stimulate the economy with the adjustment of an interest rate. Right now, that's not a possibility. I've tried sharing that on this channel lots of times, that the Federal Reserve is not in a position with the Fed funds rate that they could lower them and stimulate the economy in any way, shape, or form, even if they were to take the Fed funds rate to zero. Okay? They could not get far enough below neutral to stimulate the economy. If they did it right now, they might get some really decent stimulating effect out of it, as most people would probably lose their mind with the idea of it. But ultimately, to understand that the position that the Federal Reserve holds, that if they were to lower interest rates, unless they had an absolute major inflationary expectation pressure that was taking place at the exact same time, there is nothing that they can do to stimulate the economy. Literally nothing. Without massive elevated inflation expectations, it would have to be like COVID level expectations. And then they could lower interest rates to zero, and that might have some sort of stimulating effect on the economy. Other than that, the lowering of the Fed funds rate to zero would generally happen when inflation has fallen dramatically and they're trying to increase the inflationary scenario, increase the inflationary pressures. The problem that they will face from that is that once they take the Fed funds rate to zero, they will not be far enough below neutral in order to stimulate the economy. R star is very close to zero. So there's no room, literally nothing out there for the Federal Reserve to do that can stimulate the economy with an interest rate adjustment. It just doesn't work. Now, there is money injections, there is expectations, the forward guidance, there's all kinds of other tools that they can use. And the communication about an interest rate adjustment is incredibly powerful. But the interest rate adjustment itself is not as powerful of a tool as it once was. And very few people understand that or know that. Now, the Fed has expressed that many times in their documents, but not out there in the mainstream media. All right, Crusader Capitalist. Other than the elevated inflation expectations, what do you believe the private market can do to raise R star? There's nothing the private market can do. There's nothing that they can do. The R star. Okay, so the reason why R star is so low is because of three main trends, right? Demographics, older population, trend growth, right? The global growth around the world slowed down dramatically, and that heightened wedge, right? That elevated wedge between the safe and liquid assets and riskier corporate debt. So basically, people were not concerned about the future inflation, and they were willing to accept a very low interest rate on their secured rates, on their secured return, like treasury rates. So if they were guaranteed a return and it was really low, they were okay with that. Well, that was a problem for the Federal Reserve. It created this major wedge between those treasuries and the riskier corporate debt. If you go into a downturn and you try to lower interest rates, generally it's going to be in the treasury department, right? So you go and you buy a bunch of treasuries, it lowers the yield on those. When those yields come down, the fixed income investors say, oh man, now we have to take on risk, right? We have to go out there and find somewhere to get a decent rate of return to deal with the fact that the yields on these treasuries just came down. So when the Fed lowers the yields on the US treasuries, it literally gets the markets to go out there and buying into the riskier corporate debt. But if the yields are already low, you can't lower them anymore, and people aren't going to go into the corporate debt in order to stimulate the economy. It's just stuck. Right? And this is the problem that the Federal Reserve was facing. All those trends have not really been alleviated that much, right? Like now the interest rates are a little bit more elevated, which is kind of what everybody is looking at. And in that case, yes, it has alleviated somewhat of that problem with that wedge, but the wedge is still quite wide. And the idea of lowering the US treasuries to stimulate the economy isn't really necessarily in the cards to be played, right? I mean, it you can threaten to do it, but the reality is that it probably won't work very well. So the problems with low R star are still here, right? And I don't know what it is that anybody could do in the private market to deal with the demographics issue of an older population, global trend growth that had slowed down. We have to literally wait for all the bad undergrowth to burn away so that a new established business can now compete against that. That takes time, and it really takes a depressionary or at least a major recessionary event to take place to clear out all that dead undergrowth. Although that somewhat occurred during COVID, not really. Like, here we are, we're still seeing somewhat of the problems with the zombie corporations failing, but it didn't really clear out a bunch of the dead undergrowth, like a major depression, recessionary thing that just wipes out massive amounts of companies and major layoffs that occur from it and all kinds of stuff. Although people want to say that happened, it didn't really happen in that way, because you really think about it, after the COVID pandemic kicked in, unemployment fell dramatically after the rise of unemployment, right, when that took place. But then we found that all these corporations were just went on this major hiring spree, and you couldn't find anybody to work at McDonald's, but yet you could find all these jobs over at these zombie corporations. And again, that dropped unemployment to a historically low level. So in that sense right there, when you think about what it is that was taking place within the Federal Reserve and their ability to then stimulate the economy, the R-star situation never really moved. All that stuff that had taken place didn't pull R-star up or anything like that. It did a little bit, like it kind of started. What it really did is it added a bunch of inflation expectation to the R-star scenario, which then forces the Federal Reserve to try and fight that inflationary scenario. Remove the inflation, and boom, that's it. They're back at the lower bound of zero with no way of stimulating the economy. Like right now, if you had an inflationary expectation that is quite persistent and the Fed lowers interest rates to zero, that would that would definitely cause a stimulating effect within the economy. The reality of the situation would be different, but the people themselves would be like, holy crap, look what's going on here. And it would definitely have a profound impact on the economy, as people would then, just not only suspect and believe, but then behave in a way that would create the inflationary scenario. Eventually, it would fade out and wouldn't work, and then they would have absolutely no room to move and no way of talking about the adjustment of interest rates, and then their monetary policy would really be at an end. Does all that kind of make sense? R-star is not something that the public is going to be able to deal with. It's a growing trend that's been going on for a while, that doesn't really have to do as much with the banking system itself as much as it has to do with, again, the demographics of the aging population, the global growth, and then that heightened wedge, right, between them. That really has to come down to that older population looking for a safe place to put their money. They don't want to take on risks. They don't want to take on a higher return. They want to put their money into something that is going to have a very secure rate of return. Even if it was low, they were okay with it, and that was a problem. They don't want them to be okay with that. They want them to have an elevated risk idea and demand a higher return on those things, so that it would be easier to stimulate the corporations. In my opinion, it would be easier to stimulate the corporations if they were to do that. You get these two close together, and then you drop the yields on the treasuries, and then all of a sudden these fixed income investors have to go well, where do we go? Right? Got to take on risk. You guys having fun? I was going to quit this live stream a little while ago, but we just kept going here, so That makes everything still based on more debt, doesn't it? Everything is more. I messed up in 2019. Fortunes were made, those willing to buy oil and copper. So is digital currency basically a lifeline to stave off the pain from inflation or deflation? I believe digital currencies is the next step into it, yeah. In fact, it's not me who is saying that. This is something like, if you go back and you look at some of the videos that I had done early on when I started this channel, like literally 7 years ago, one of them I did was cashless society needs digital currencies, something like that. Anyway, it was talking about cashless society. The Bureau of International Settlements talked about this. Like, in order to have a negative interest rates, you need to have cash removed from the system. And so this is where I got the idea. It wasn't like something I made up. This is something that came from the Bureau of International Settlements itself. And so they ultimately said it, like, there's many nations out there who would like to take interest rates into negative territory to try and stimulate their economy. But unfortunately, we're in a situation in which that really won't work, because the moment you go into negative rates, people are just going to go out there and grab the cash. So they said, we need to figure out a way to have two currencies, an e-currency and cash, and they would be equivalent to each other. They were describing to a T stablecoins, like straight up. And then later I started reading in the Federal Reserve documents about how stablecoins and regulation of stablecoins is going to be like the next form of currency. The Federal Reserve doesn't want to change anything about the way they're doing it. They don't want to be the issuer of these stablecoins. They don't want to be the issuer of the digital currency. Like, I'm sure they would love to be the issuer of it, but unfortunately their charter doesn't allow them to operate in that fashion, so they don't really want to mess with the digital currency themselves. They would much rather have the private sector do that and then have government regulate that. Okay? Because if you have government regulating it, then you can have them dealing with that, and the Federal Reserve can operate their monetary policy the way that they normally would, and anything that they do with their monetary policy would be transferred right into that stable coin. So they don't have to do anything different than what they are doing, and then let the government regulate the stable coins, and everything works out really well for their position with their charter, and how that is that they are mandated to try and provide liquidity and money into the banking system and all that. They wouldn't have to change any of the legalities or the laws about it, which is like perfect for them. All right. Alrighty, guys. Are we done? I think we're done here. This was literally, we're 91 minutes into this thing, so an hour and a half, very long live stream. Wanted to break down the essay on X. I had promised that I was going to read the 8th chapter, the 3 chapters of increase and decrease of money to the state. Promised the fellas over on X that I would do that. So here it is on YouTube as well for you guys. Again, this is something that I have broken down many, many times. And sharing these 3 chapters, I really honestly feel that if there was never anything that you had ever read on economics ever, and never plan on doing anything ever again as far as studying economics, this essay, Canton essay on economic theory, the 3 chapters in part 2 of the essay, chapters 6, 7, and 8. The essay is for free at the Mises Institute. You can get it for free, no paying, no signing up, nothing. You can get the PDF for free. So go to Mises Institute, download the PDF, go to part 2 of the essay, chapter 6, 7, and 8, the increase and decrease of money to the state. Read those chapters over and over and over again. Again, if you're never going to read anything else, internalize the message that he is delivering through those 3 chapters. It is going to give you a profound understanding of what it is that's happening out there in the economy. You're going to laugh at the people who talk about returning manufacturing back to the country, paying out real good wage jobs, and having all this other stuff, and you can look at it and say, yeah, that's not going to take place. Not unless we move out of the luxurious experience, right? Because nobody wants to do that. Everybody wants the luxuries. That's why they're working hard. That's why they show up every day, so that they can enjoy the luxuries. And by enjoying the luxurious experience, you're literally creating the problems that we now face today, which is understandable. It's just the way it goes. Simon, handing out economic cheat codes here. Absolutely. No, absolutely. Was that Justin? Yeah, absolutely. It's a cheat code to the economic. Nobody else is describing it. Here it is. This book written hundreds of years ago, and not like a single person out there like I look all over the internet for evidence of somebody who is describing the economic forces. Instead, literally every single article and every single person I listen to describes the symptoms. They are literally focused in on the symptoms of it, not understanding the reality of the situation. And you know the reason why is because they don't want to believe it themselves. That's what it really comes down to. They do not want to believe it themselves that the position that they are now in is creating the problem that they're trying to describe out there. Yeah, I mean, how many times have you ever heard them say, it's just like, well, the 4 houses that I own and all the fancy cars and all the wonderful trips and all the other stuff has created this inequality that now you face that is going to be a burden on you and your family. Like, how many people out there are really going to describe it to you like that? None, right? Nobody is. They don't want to. They don't want to be blamed for the problem. They want to blame. They want to point the finger at anything else out there. But we know it's luxuries, one way or the other. Whether you borrow the money to buy the luxuries or you earned it, one way or the other is the luxurious experience that is doing it. Uneducated economist. You guys let me know.